In our last lecture, we looked at interethnic cooperation. In this lecture, we turn our attention to future prospects. One of the constant themes throughout our lecture series is the idea that ethnicity as a concept is fickle. This was amply seen when examining the varying notions of ethnicity and ethnic minority categories around the world. Some nations continue to practice fixed assumed categories with little room for deviation in what constitutes ethnicity and ethnic groups. Other nations have embraced ethnic categorization on the basis of an individual's self-identification, even to the extent that one can theoretically have infinite ethnic hybrids. Despite these differences, the emergence of ethnicity as a subject of social, political, and economic importance, due in large part to increasing ethnic minority populations, has put issues of educational attainment and occupational outcomes at the forefront. While the education of ethnic minorities have been relatively successful in numerous jurisdictions, to the extent that their educational attainments are on par with or even exceed that of the dominant group, from a social justice perspective, the existence of ethnic penalties in the labor market can be an affront to the normative principles of equality of opportunity. In fact, one can argue that there's a moral obligation to seek equity in the labor market insofar it represents the ethnic diversity of the community. While the validity of this social justice argument can be debated, we ought to also frame the justification for improving ethnic minority representation in the labor market by also stressing the economic benefits. The ethnic penalty represents an inefficient allocation of human capital, imposing an added economic cost on all individuals regardless of their status as dominant or minority group members. Given the risk-averse nature of employers, employment equity often suffers. Employers are more inclined to hire people similar to them, akin to a potential friend who they perceive to share a high social trust with. Notwithstanding, it can rob a firm's sort of competitiveness, while the skills and training of those who are inefficiently allocated in the labor market are devalued. It appears that improving ethnic minorities' occupational realities is often seen as social welfare rather than an economic benefit. If the conversation, therefore, is framed within an economic benefit argument, then both public and private enterprises are more inclined to listen. The message that has to be delivered is that ethnic minority groups are important for the economic benefit of the community. Although one can be optimistic that in generations there's going to be a gradual convergence in labor market experiences between ethnic minorities and the dominant group, this argument is not helpful for the current generation who do not have the luxury of waiting. The fear is that many ethnic minorities may become disengaged, developing a gap between expectations developed through their educational attainment and what is realized in the primary labor market. A more realistic reading of the evidence presented throughout the lecture series can conclude that some intervention is needed at this juncture. Government expenditure in education in Western jurisdictions are large. For example, the Canadian government expenditure on education is around 6% of GDP. Governments at all levels have a significant stake in ensuring ethnic minorities realize their potential in the labor market and to minimize the economic losses that come with the underutilization of their human capital in the form of education. It is apparent that ethnic minority realities are not fully understood by the local non-minority population. There are a lot of misunderstandings when it comes to the livelihoods of ethnic minorities. The local government can play a major role in reducing the stereotypical image of ethnic minorities as being backward and having a culture that is dramatically different. It may be beneficial for local educational authorities to promote cultural education and make this mandatory in elementary and secondary school curriculums, teaching about the history and traditions of ethnic minorities in a non-patronizing and non-commodifying fashion. Of course, combating deep-seated prejudices is a difficult proposition for any government policy. But this does not mean that the local government cannot implement strategies to assist in changing the commodified perception of ethnic minorities. Whether there's sufficient political capital or motivation necessary to enact such policies is another question. Non-action in these regards can be explained if governments embrace the idea that the market is the final arbiter of social justice. That is, the market can determine the fair distribution and compensation for labor. In line with this process, one potential fear is that if government intervenes, they may effectively distort market conditions. To this we can reply the formidable role of strong and weak social networks or social trust in the job allocation process demonstrates the inadequacy of leaving labor market equity to market forces. As our lectures have attested, there are significant market failures which have little to do with statistical discrimination as traditionally understood. And this really plays a powerful role in perpetuating the ethnic penalty. Conversely, educational and occupational experiences are influenced by social and psychological externalities, notably within the social context of opportunity within which ethnic minority groups are embedded. Thus, government's legitimacy and motivation to enact policies to curb the ethnic penalty stems from this realization. Local ethnic community associations can also be a valuable resource in improving the situation for ethnic minorities in the labor market. When we observe the Toronto case, ethnic associations can act as a social forum or an information point to promote ethnic minority issues. Ethnic associations can play a major role in providing support for ethnic minorities by acting as a networking mechanism to encourage greater access to high-wage, high-status positions in the labor market. Yet, it does appear that local associations often operate without awareness of each other, thus increasing the likelihood that their members reproduce job allocations in the secondary labor market. With added support from the local government, various ethnic associations could be encouraged to meet with each other, as well as with relevant chambers of commerce and boards of trade. This in turn can provide greater opportunities for ethnic minorities with a greater social network to succeed in the primary labor market, as well as hopefully improve social trust between various ethnic minority groups and the dominant majority. It is also theorized that the capacity to export goods and services outside of the environment of the local jurisdiction will potentially be expanded by tapping into the translocal and transnational ethnic networks that ethnic minorities often possess. While it may be cliché to state that further study is necessary to increase our understanding of the operations and the functioning of the ethnic penalty, especially in regards to explanatory factors such as exclusionary discrimination, social network, working culture, and social trust. With increased data, the reliability of observations and theories presented throughout the lectures will improve. In particular, it is prudent to enhance our comprehension of social trust and how it manifests and works at the local community level. To date, there appears to be a growing body of literature focused on discussing the utility of the concept philosophically, rather than practically refining testing procedures that accurately measure social trust. In addition, increased scholarship explicitly examining the notion of an ethnic penalty, especially non-traditionally viewed multicultural societies, for example Germany or Austria or Russia, may assist to dispel arguments that there are no systemic disadvantages for ethnic minorities in the labor market, or it is a, quote, new world immigrant receptive nations problem. One of the lessons we can learn from our lecture series is that both traditionally and untraditionally viewed multi-ethnic communities, there exists an ethnic disadvantage in the labor market. Complacency vis-a-vis a lack of inquiry into ethnic minority realities can have dangerous consequences by justifying the status quo. When we return the story to the Canadian context, we see that Canada applauds itself as a true multicultural success story, whereby ethnic minority groups from all regions of the world are able to immigrate to the nation and enjoy equity in mass diversity. In many respects, this goal of equity and access for all has been successfully achieved when examining the educational attainments of ethnic minorities. However, a key ingredient in really achieving the multicultural society envisioned is equity in the labor market. With a projected increase in the ethnic minority population in Canada, it is vital not only on the basis of social equity, but also in terms of economic imperatives to effectively capitalize on untapped human capital. It is prudent that we do not rest on our past ethnic minority development laurels, but acknowledge that an ethnic penalty exists, understand the nature of its potential causes, and enact progressive steps to reduce its effects. In fact, I would suggest to you that the effective management of immigration and ethnic minority groups demands that we do this. This concludes our lecture on future prospects, and in fact, it concludes our lecture series on ethnicity, immigration, and social policy.